Welcome to another Crafting with Roswell. Today we are going to be tackling a humorous cross stitch. Rather than making you watch me do an entire cross stitch, I am going to be showing you some tips and tricks. And you might hear a door opening and closing. It's just because we are busily at work here at the library in different ways. And so you'll hear us in action. So in your kit, you have your postcard. Back of your postcard reminds you that your kit includes a 4-inch embroidery hoop, a piece of cross-stitch fabric, and your embroidery needle is tucked in. And you'll also receive your design pattern. Now this design is definitely larger than the embroidery hoop, but I made the template a little bigger to be slightly easier on your eyes, because I know sometimes you can get into a little bit of eye strain when you're working on a cross stitch pattern. So the template pattern itself is a little larger to help you follow along with where you need to move about to create the whole design a little easier. So you will also need embroidery thread. So I have one of the colors I am using here to show you how to cut off a small section, how to get started using your thread. I have a pencil to help mark the center of my canvas and also to help cross off what I've already completed of my template in case you have trouble getting started, losing track of where you are. You can always just cross off the squares on your sheet. Suggested extras would be a frame for your finished project, or you could tape off the back and kind of trim the canvas around the embroidery hoop itself and keep it in the embroidery hoop forever. And then a magnifying glass. So if you happen to have one of those craft magnifying setups that would help you see the whole project or see details a little closer, you might consider using it for this project, just because these are small holes that you could develop a little eye strain, or you could find yourself needing to take breaks while you make this project, and that's perfectly acceptable as well. So let's get started. So to get started, we will work with our canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out my needle. Luckily my background is black, so I'm not going to lose track of the needle. It is a silver/gold toned needle for embroidery that we are using, and so depending on your surface you could lose track of it, so be mindful of that. I'm going to go ahead and fold this square once. I try to do as even a cut as possible. If it's a little off, I'm very sorry. It was very tricky to cut out 30 different squares when the originals weren't all squared up. It turns out to. We're just going to fold it in half and then fold it in half again. So this is one way to find the center of your canvas without having to try to count all these tiny squares. So we're just going for a rough middle point with where the lines meet, and where they meet before it gets unfolded any further or these lines start to fade away, I'm just going to make a mark using my pencil across the center of my center spot. And so I'm not worried about that showing, because this is literally where my first stitch will go, and that will cover over this pencil mark when we make our cross stitch, which is essentially 2 diagonals making an X. That is our cross stitch. So next up is preparing our hoop. So first I go ahead and loosen the screw hinge at the top, and I am practically completely unscrewing it. So there's very little overhang on this side, and this gives you the most flexibility to then expand that outer frame piece of the hoop around the centerpiece which will have our canvas attached. So there are different ways that you can go about connecting these two back together. The easiest I've found is to center my hoop over my center of my fabric, and then take my hoop itself, and I prefer working with this at the very top. If you tend to go at the side, go wherever, just kind of place this in wherever you're comfortable working. And this right now is the back side of our fabric. So this won't even show looking out the front, and it'll be covered over. So since I like to do at the top, I'm just going to go ahead, hold this inner hoop over my canvas with my center point in the middle, and that point I'm just perfectly guessing on. So it looks even centered to me, and that's what I'm going with. As long as you stay fairly close, your whole design will fit within your hoop without having to move it. So now that I've got this held over, I'm just going to actually kind of tip in the bottom and push down to get this to fit inside this outer hoop. So like I just did, you might find yourself having to stretch the top a little if it's fully closed, and give yourself that extra space to be able to push the fabric and that inner hoop into the outer hoop. And now I'm just going to do a few quick turns to tighten. So I don't want to have it completely tightened where I can't make any adjustments yet. I just want it so that my two hoops aren't going to separate. And then I'm going to flip it over. So right now I have a little bunch up here. So I'm just going to pull on my fabric because there's still enough give, because I haven't tightened the hoops too far, to pull that flat. And then I'm just going to give each side and corner a little tug to help this be flush. And then I'm going to tighten my ring some more. Once you're fully tightened and your canvas fabric is stretched inside your hoop, if you tap your finger on it, it'll almost sound like a drum. I don't know if you can hear that. I hope you can. So it's nice and tight. And so we want to have a nice, tight canvas stretch in this hoop in order to help our design keep from puckering, and the same tension as we're pulling our needle and embroidery thread through. So now our canvas is ready. My center is marked to know where to start pushing my needle up through from the back side. So I'm going to set that aside. So next up is just showing you really quick. Embroidery thread comes in a variety of colors. So this one's actually got purple and it's sparkly. So this is the one I'm using for my project. I tend to cut off like a 1 foot length to work with. And then we're not threading all of this through our needle. We only actually need 2 strands. So embroidery thread is actually made up of 6 single strands. And so we're going to separate out 2 strands to use at a time for our project. So I just carefully pull and separate, and it should peel free. And then this will get threaded into my needle. And if this happens, because it is 2 separate single threads, just push it flat. Sometimes the oils in your fingers are enough to get the ends to behave to thread your needle. If you have a tool to help you thread a needle, by all means, save yourself a little struggle and use one of those. And now we are threaded. So to show you how to get started, we're going to bring our template over. And you'll notice on your template, the end and finish has one square that's a slightly different shading. That is actually the center of this design, and therefore the first stitch we're going to do in our canvas. So I'm going to grab my needle and thread. I prefer not to knot anything when I'm doing a cross stitch. I tend to leave a tail of fabric. But all I'm going to do now is push my needle through one of the holes surrounding my center mark. And then on the back side, I'm going to leave 1 inch to 1/2 inch of string, and I'm going to hold it with my finger and flip my hoop forward. And so now that I'm in one of the holes, you can decide if you're going to the left or the right, but you essentially have 1, 2, 3, 4 points. And with those 4 points, we are going to connect our cross stitch. So I'm in this point right here. I'm going to push my needle into the point diagonally across and pull, but not too tight with your very first stitch. Otherwise, you're going to pull all of your thread through your canvas panel. And this can feel like a hunt and peck, hide and seek kind of thing, but you're going to then push your needle up through the bottom right corner and then push through the top left corner. And then we've made our first X, our first cross stitch. And so if you're keeping track with your pencil, you can draw a little line through that stitch to know that that's one you've completed. So next, not using the hole that you used last, which was the top left, we're going to bring our needle up through our canvas once again and make another 1/2 an X diagonal. And then I'm going to jump down to the bottom. So I'm in the bottom right, and then I'm going to go to the top left point. And now we have 2 of our stitches done for this project. And as you can see by our sheet, there are a lot more to go. So my suggestion, especially for newbies, is to finish one letter at a time. You can change colors for each letter. You can do all of your letters in one color. That's completely up to you. If you make a mistake in your pattern, you can always use your embroidery needle to help pull your stitches back out. You can use cuticle scissors to help cut your string free without cutting your canvas. There are lots of ways if you make a mistake on a letter to go back and redo it. The only harder part will be if you find a mistake you've done later on and you have to come all the way back over here and undo this using one string all the way through. That's going to be a little bit more work to undo and protect your letters that you've already done if you're going all the way back to the beginning. So I tend to finish a letter, tie off my string, and then start a new letter. And when I say tie off my string, what I do is from the back side, I take my needle and I just tuck it under what I've already sewn through and pull it through twice. And then cut away a bit of the extra. And so my stitches are set. The back is now tied off. I don't have any knots, so there's nothing going to push on my canvas if I do decide to frame this. If you're not going to frame this and keep it just in your hoop, by all means, you can use little knots on the back side to help keep your threads in place and from pulling out. And so then you'll just keep counting through, making all of your X's to match all of the shaded boxes on your design template. If you get stuck at all or have any questions, please reach out to me here at the libraries. Contact me ahead of time to make sure that my schedule has time, and I will sit down with you and help you get started and give you some tips in person to see any areas that you might be getting caught up on. But I'm not going to have you sit here and watch me stitch the entire project. It does take a bit of time. But here's an update on where I'm at so far. So just for you to see, your pattern does fit inside the hoop. And I'm just alternating my colors. So once I finish anything, I will share my finished, unfinished project with all of you. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm here to help you. Cross stitch can be a very relaxing activity once you get started. And so I hope you enjoy this project. We'll be back again next week with a leprechaun photo holder, and that will be a little less detailed. Bye, everyone.